there is obviously a massive problem in South Africa, which I suppose worldwide has now hit the focus thanks to the work of Thomas Piketty, and that has to do with income inequality. And you can stand on your head. In South Africa, that is a huge problem. Now, 2 or 3 things about that, if I may. The first is that a study was done by the World Bank. I pause in parentheses to say it's funny because when I quote this to the EFF, they say, but the World Bank are just a bunch of sort of neoliberal, filthy running dog capitalists, close bracket. But on this case, the World Bank has done a really serious study, which is actually, in a sense, everybody should take seriously. It shows that because of the tax and transfer system that we're operating in South Africa, the Gini coefficient, which would be round about 0.78, 1 being a perfectly unequal society and 0 being a perfectly equal society, has been reduced to 0.59. Now that's appallingly high. But what is interesting, don't you think, is that we have reduced it significantly, and what may make you think even more is that according to the World Bank, it's the most successful tax and transfer system of any developing country in the world. Far more than Brazil, which is much heralded for its system, or any of the other Latin American countries. And so the first thing I wanted to say about that was that you can understand my anxiety if we can't collect enough tax. Because if we can't collect enough tax, then the central pillar of, I think, social stability, and my goodness, we need every pillar we can, would actually be knocked down because clearly the fact that tax and transfers are working as well as they are, right, is indicative that it's at least some stabilizer, and if you didn't have enough money for it, what then? So you can understand the effect of what would happen if the interest rates go up and ultimately you now less 70 or another 100 billion, which you may want to plow into that, now you can't. That's why it's so significant. The second point that I want to make in relation to inequality is the issue that has come before us often, lots of discussion about it, and that is discussion with regard to wealth taxes. Now, if you're going to have a wealth tax, then that's a new design of a tax, and quite frankly, I'm not certain that South Africa should have any more new taxes. I think we should be trying to make our own taxes as efficient as possible. It turns out we have got a form of wealth tax through a state duty. It turns out that we do. It only collects 1.5 billion at the moment, but that's because, in my humble opinion, anybody who pays a state duty is either an idiot or just wants to pay tax. And the reason I say that is not entirely facetiously. It's because, given the nature of our State Duty Act, it is almost a slam dunk case that you can save a state duty, that there's no need to pay it, that you can structure your affairs through trusts and through what is called Section 4Q of the State Duty Act. If you want to know, I'll tell you the technicalities later, but you can certainly reduce your estate for estate duty purposes. And the real question is whether in fact we should not be more serious about this, because clearly in an unequal society, it's not an unimportant part for the legitimacy of a tax system that there should be at least some modest taxation of wealth. I mean, we just need to realize the society we're in. And so accordingly, you will see within the next week or two, a paper will be, our report, our interim report on estate duty will be tabled for public comment. I'm going to leave town when it goes, no, it's not that bad. We're publishing that report. We're also publishing a report on VAT, which has detailed analysis of VAT, and that will be out in the next couple of weeks, and together with a normative framework of how we think tax should work, also will be published in the next few weeks. They're literally at the editing stage now, the minister having given approval for their publication. But that issue is one that's clearly on the table. We are not inclined to change capital gains tax at this stage. It seems to me ill-advised. And one of the things that we are trying to investigate, and I would want to do more on if we can, is how we can encourage savings. It does seem to me that this is should be an issue, given the really shocking levels of investment in our country. Although I'm well aware of how the big pots of cash that the multinationals are sitting on, that the corporations are sitting in, because they don't have confidence in the economy. But the fact is, savings is an important issue. And so we are looking at that. And one has to balance those issues, which is why when we do recommend our state duty, you'll see that we've fastidiously taken out middle-class people out of the ambit, to defined as anybody who's basically got an estate of somewhere around 7 million, which in South Africa is quite a lot, despite the fact that you may not think so. But if you were living in the rural areas, you'd think it's absolutely utopia. So that's on those particular those issues. Let me make one or two final points. I do think that the problem that we've got overall is how do we therefore continue to show that given the importance, the vital importance of the tax and transfer system, as I've suggested, and all of the other capital demands made on this country, do we keep a tax system operating which doesn't impede economic growth more than is possible, because taxes inevitably do influence behavior, on the one hand, whilst on the other hand, ensuring that we don't run deficits any more than are promised. And I just want to say something, if I may, which really, I just wonder. It's not something which is in my tax remit, but perhaps I'll be interested in your views, as to why we just can't seem to get a national conversation going about issues such as wage increases, etc. So what I mean by that is, so if the unions get 10%, actually what will happen, the public sector unions, what will probably happen is that government will have to borrow more. And if government borrows more, that means the interest rate costs go up. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure that a 10% increase won't be more than 7 or 8% in real terms anyway, because of the additional costs that are going to occur. And the question that you've got to ask yourself is, not that I'm not aware of the fact that we have a gross inequality of income. I've made that very clear, and I want to emphasize that. But to what extent do we actually pull together at a stage and say that can be the only increase we can afford now, because we've got to get ourselves out of the mess that we're in?